We all kind of think we know one thing for sure, right? A mother's instinct is to protect her kids. It's just fundamental. But what happens when that instinct gets twisted, corrupted by a dark, apocalyptic prophecy? What if a mom looks at her own children and doesn't see them, but sees a demon instead? Well, this case, it's absolutely chilling because it flips that whole sacred idea completely on its head. Now, that quote you just saw, that's not from some random person. That was a desperate warning from Lori Vallow's own husband, Charles. He said this to the police, just months before he was killed. It really just sets the stage for how high the stakes were from the very beginning. We're talking life and death, fanaticism, and murder. So you gotta be asking, how does someone even get to that point? Before all the madness, Lori Vallow, she seemed totally normal, just your typical suburban mom living out in Arizona. But then her life took this incredibly dark turn, and it all started when she met one guy, Chad Daybell.
And this guy, Chad Daybell, he wasn't just some regular author. Oh no, he called himself a prophet. He told people he could see the future, that he could talk to the dead. So when Lori met him at a conference back in 2018, it wasn't just some casual meeting. It was literally the spark that ignited this whole horrific tragedy.
Okay, so to really get what happens next, you have to wrap your head around this central and frankly bizarre belief they had. It all revolved around this idea of zombies. Now, in their world, a zombie wasn't like in the movies. It was a person whose original soul had left and been replaced by a dark spirit. And get this, they believed the only way to help that person, to free their original soul, was to kill the body. So murder became an act of mercy. It's just so twisted. And it didn't stay a theory for long, not at all. This dangerous belief jumped from idea to, violent reality pretty fast. And their first target? The man who was standing in their way. So Lori starts telling people, even her own husband Charles, that he wasn't himself anymore. She claimed his body had been taken over by a dark spirit. She even gave it a name, Nick Schneider. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some weird, quirky belief. It was basically a death sentence. This next part it's just so jarring. The contrast is absolutely chilling. So on the morning of July 11th, Charles shows up at Lori's house, and her brother, Alex Cox, shoots and kills him. The claim? Self-defense. But then, that same afternoon, with her husband just killed, Lori is throwing a pool party at her house. A pool party. It just shows this unbelievable lack of remorse, right from the get-go. So with Charles out of the picture, Lori's focus and the whole tragedy, it shifts. And it shifts to the two most vulnerable people in this whole story, her own kids, Tylee and JJ. Just 2 months after her husband's death, Lori suddenly packs everything up, grabs her kids, and moves from Arizona to Rexburg, Idaho. Why? Well, it was all to be closer to her prophet, Chad Daybell. And, by the way, Chad was still married at this point to his wife of 3 decades, Tammy. And this is where things get really, really scary. It's where the kids' timelines just stop. Tylee, she's last seen in a photo from a trip to Yellowstone on September 8th. Then, just 2 weeks later, her little brother JJ, who was 7 and had autism, is seen for the very last time. And when people started asking, hey, where are the kids? Lori had these easy lies all ready to go. Oh, Tylee's off at college, JJ's staying with relatives. But the truth was so much darker. It wasn't just the children who vanished. As Lori and Chad got closer and closer, it seems like anyone who was seen as an obstacle, they met a very suspicious end. Just look at this timeline. It's absolutely staggering when you see it laid out. In less than 2 months, think about that, both of Lori's kids disappear. Then, Chad's wife, Tammy, dies suddenly in her sleep. And right after that, Lori and Chad are getting married on a beach in Hawaii. The speed of it all is just horrifying. But the walls started to close in. JJ's grandparents were getting, absolutely frantic. They called the police to do a welfare check. Lori straight up lies to the cops. But when the police come back the next day with a search warrant, the house is empty. Lori and Chad were gone. They'd already taken off for Hawaii. Then the big break in the case came from a really unexpected place. Remember Lori's brother, Alex Cox, the guy who shot Charles Vallow? Well, she had also died suddenly. They called it natural causes. But the police, they were smart. They tracked his cell phone data from the days the kids went missing, and the pings led them to one very specific spot, Chad Daybell's backyard.
And what they found there, it's just pure nightmare fuel. Tylee's remains, they were dismembered, burned, and buried in a fire pit. And just nearby, in a pet cemetery on the property, they found little JJ. He was still in his red pajamas, bound with duct tape and wrapped in plastic. In their mother's eyes, the children had become zombies. And this was their horrific fate.
So after all those months of searching, and after that absolutely horrific discovery, the focus finally shifted. It wasn't about finding the kids anymore. It was about getting justice for JJ and Tylee. Throughout her trial, Lori Vallow was just completely detached. It was like she was in another reality. She showed zero emotion, absolutely no remorse for her own kids. Instead, she just stuck to her story, claiming she was still talking to Jesus and that nobody was really dead.
But the jury, they saw right through it. They found her guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiring to kill her own children. And the sentence was exactly what you'd expect: life in prison with no chance of parole, ever. In the end, the prosecutors laid it all out. They argued this was never really about God or the apocalypse. Nope, it was about something much more simple and ugly: getting rid of obstacles. A husband, a wife, 2 kids, all so they could have what they wanted, each other. And of course, the life insurance money that came with all those deaths. And that leaves us with this one big lingering question. Lori saw herself as a goddess, and Chad was her prophet. But the more you look at it, the harder it is to tell who was really pulling the strings. Was it the so-called prophet preying on a follower? Or was it the goddess who used his strange beliefs to justify her own terrible desires? That's the question that still hangs over this whole thing, and honestly, we might never know the real answer.